Hello and welcome back to the Audible Finish, where we discuss the week gone by in the world of wrestling. I am your host, Dimitri Carlos, and alongside me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, Thanasi. Hello, Thanasi.
Salutations and peace.
In this week's episode, we review the events from WWE, with the biggest piece of news being the official setup of Roman Reigns' fatal four-way WWE Universal Championship defense against Randy Orton, AJ Styles, and LA Knight. Has the tribal chief bitten off more than he can chew? Later on, we will also talk about what happened in AEW as their world champion Samoa Joe saw himself presented with a list of hungry challengers waiting to take his AEW World Championship away from him. If you are enjoying the podcast and have a moment, please like, share, and subscribe. On that note, let's dive right into this week's Smackdown episode. Thanasi, you have the con. What stood out to you?
Well, so in on this episode of SmackDown's New Year's Revolution, the opening contest was Kevin Owens against Santos Escobar in the final of the US title number one contenders tournament. And just the first thing that stuck out to me was a match opens the show. Isn't that beautiful? It's something we're not accustomed to on WWE television. And in this match, Kevin Owens hits the pop-up powerbomb and then the stunner to pin his opponent. And then Logan Paul, who was on guest commentary, starts mouthing off and for his troubles gets punched in the face. Great stuff from Kevin Owens, who of course had the black cast from his recent hand injury. Next up, and this is the talking point that I want to run through together, Dimitri, is the Street Profits and Bobby Lashley are attacked during their promo by Karrion Kross and the returning Authors of Pain, accompanied by Paul Ellering. What are your thoughts, first of all, on the stagnation of the Street Profits and Bobby Lashley, who've been talking about gold for what seems to be months on end and making no progress? And then, of course, the return of Ackerman and Razor and Paul Ellering onto WWE main roster television.
I'll start with the second point you raised, and I think it's very exciting to have another tag team thrown into the mix, and Paul Ellering is fantastic, so I'm very happy to see them back in WWE, back in programming, and hopefully uh, this leads into them doing something productive. Onto the point of the Street Profits and Bobby Lashley. I think this is what happens when you fall victim into a good idea, but bad timing. I think for them, the problem they have is that it just seems like the things they are seeking, it just hasn't put timeline wise, it hasn't been a good uh setup for them to actually follow through with what they're saying. And this is unfortunately something that happens to a lot of wrestlers, is that they'll present themselves with a goal in mind, something that they're striving towards. And unless it feels like that is the exact moment that they need to do it, that there isn't anything else to consider, then that's what can stymie them sometimes. So with Bobby Lashley, like he wants gold, but he's not going to beat Roman Reigns. It just doesn't feel right. And WWE have just thrown Logan Paul into the mix, and they probably want to keep that on him for a little while. And they probably don't see Logan Paul versus Bobby Lashley as marketable as Logan Paul versus Kevin Owens.
My disappointment really with these particular two, and I will respond to the AOP part as well, but since you've brought it up, I think I would have preferred some kind of faction warfare, which was teased in the middle months of last year, and that just did not come to fruition. And I'm not sure exactly why WWE has a seeming opposition to that, but that just felt like they really went and have gone nowhere. Bobby Lashley, I can see why he doesn't have any gold at the moment. That's fine. But with the tag belts being monopolized by one tag team that appears predominantly and almost exclusively on Monday Night Raw, it really leaves the SmackDown tag division in a state of flux. And that's disappointing because we've got a lot of options there. We've got Pretty Deadly, who are doing quite well for themselves. We've got now Butch, Pete Dunne, and Tyler Bate together. They've tagged before in British Strong Style. And like you said, now we've got AOP and the Street Profits as well.
I
Did
want
you?
to
Yeah.
build I want to build up on that point, and I think this like it's a bit of speculation, but this could be part of the grander strategy with SmackDown right now, which is they've spent the better part of the last 6 months sort of building up tag teams and introducing new ones. So maybe they are getting ready for a new set of tag team championships exclusively for SmackDown.
Well, I hope so because the titles were merged, was it in late 2022 or early 2023? But we're closing to what is approximately a year of just one set of straps, and it just seems a bit light. In any case, let's continue on a little bit more with the show because at the top of the first hour, it was Io Sky versus Michin Mia Yim, and the highlight from this match was Michin catching the Frankensteiner and converting it into an avalanche styles clash. Nevertheless, ultimately, she did succumb to the moonsault, and Io did get the W. And of course, as I alluded to before, Pretty Deadly went down to Butch and his mystery tag partner, Tyler Bate. So, interestingly enough, British Strong Style win in their main roster debut, even though Trent Seven is plying his trade off in total nonstop action wrestling now. And the second major talking point, the final major talking point of SmackDown that I wanted to raise with you, Dimitri, the main event is the number one contenders match, AJ Styles versus LA Knight versus Randy Keith Orton. Thankfully, they got some really solid TV time to show their stuff. LA Knight got busted open after a 450 splash, and there was a near fall that occurred after the phenomenal forearm was turned into the RKO. And at the top of the show, the very, very top of the show, the bloodline unleashes all hell on all three men, leading to a no contest because a triple threat is no disqualifications. Nick Aldis is having none of it, and he tells Heyman that it's going to be a fatal four-way at the Royal Rumble. So he's going to face all three of these potential opponents. Dimitri, thoughts on this choice to go for a multi-man match? Is it the right call, or should we have had a singles match at the Royal Rumble?
Look, I think history dictates that singles matches tend to hit better, but for a guy like Roman Reigns, who has not had to face multiple challenges since I think WrestleMania 37 in the one match, a guy that has avoided the Elimination Chamber format the whole time that he's been champion, a guy that hasn't had to deal with insurmountable odds and has always had extra members of his faction helping him win. I really like this idea. And I think that it suits what they're going for here, which is also the underlying story, which is that Nick Aldis isn't going to take his shit. So I enjoy it. I think it's the right fit. And I think in a weird way, it also kind of helps out the three challenges that not any one of them is going to just be categorically beaten and put towards the back of the line.
Unless we have a stack, and pin.
Oh yeah, actually I did hear that as a rumor and a suggestion, and that was the moment I thought, oh crap, let's hope they don't do that
I bloody well hope not.
because
But
it's a bit of an exaggeration, I would say.
it's not out of the realm of possibility.
No, it's not.
That being said, that would not fall in line with the explanation for this because initially Randy Orton was going to go one-on-one with Roman Reigns, but I've been reading online that the WWE does not want him to put someone over just yet because it's too early in the run. They want to keep him hot, potentially have him in a nice marquee match for WrestleMania, or potentially even throw him into the chamber. So we
And
want Randy
it's
Orton to be strong.
and it's something with Randy that we've noticed is that even though he hasn't been a categorical world champion for a long time, the last time being in 2020, but that was more of like a stopgap to split up Drew McIntyre's reigns. It feels like WWE really want to protect his value, his stock, and it also feels like for some reason they're very hesitant to do the Randy Orton Roman Reigns match for the world title. Feels like they've been holding off on it for a long time now. So look, I don't mind it. I do enjoy sometimes the WWE approach of less is more and keep them waiting. And as long as Randy Orton has years ahead of him, I don't mind them postponing off this sort of match just yet.
That being said, it's not one of the like it would be a fantastic match to see, but it's not one that gets you salivating. And I think that's more of a function of Roman Reigns, really, because he's gone through everyone on the roster so far. So it's kind of like, well, what is left that is fresh? And that explains why he hasn't even wrestled that much, because you've got to just keep holding off for the big matches. That being said, I hope he doesn't have The Rock at WrestleMania, which is something that I'm scared about. But let's let's put a bookend on that part of the discussion, because that is the end of my SmackDown recap for the week, and I'll hand over back to you for the rest of the WWE things.
Well, on that note, let's move on to this week's Raw. And Raw this week opened with a Drew McIntyre promo segment where he was sort of venting some frustrations, owning up to his loss until he said, "No, actually, I didn't lose. Damian Priest screwed me." So good old Drew is still blaming everyone else in the world for his own problems. And honestly, as a fan, it's hard to not sympathize with the guy because he is right. Damian Priest did screw him. And he brought up an excellent point of Priest should have just waited till after the match and waited on whoever was weakened. And it's like, yeah, he's right. Not everyone needs to do the Seth Rollins approach of mid-match cash in. But then he starts talking some smack about Cody, Jey Uso, CM Punk, and obviously once he talks shit about CM Punk, that's when the Second City Saint returns and comes out. His music hits. He tells him, if there's anything you want to say to me, you can say it to my face. And at this point, Drew references a lot of things about Punk, as well as the fact that Punk called himself a locker room leader back in the day. This is something that's circulated a lot in the YouTube sphere, with a lot of talent mentioning that, especially like the senior members. And he says to him that, look, you don't have any demons, you are a demon. And he says, after 9 years, I'm your leader now, kid. And I thought, wow, okay, so he's bringing it. He's definitely bringing it. Punk sort of retorted saying that, in quite a respectful manner, that, Drew, I'm actually trying to follow your lead now. And what he meant by that is, I want to go and win the Royal Rumble and go on to main event WrestleMania. He says, look, I'm not a demon, I'm Satan himself. And he says to him, you can't stop me from winning the Rumble. Seth can't stop me from winning the Rumble. Cody can't stop me from winning the Rumble. And then he reserves right at the end. He goes, because I'm such a nice guy, I'm going to throw you out last. Now, a lot of people have been talking about this segment. A lot of people felt that this was an excellent confrontation between the pair. Then I said, what are your thoughts on this segment?
To be quite honest with you, I was a little bit let down, and I'll tell you why. It doesn't really feel like this segment gave us any direction, right? We haven't really learned anything new. And this is by no means a criticism of either of the talent, because their confrontation was heated. There was a lot of fire behind it, but the substance was not really there. And I mean the storyline direction. Because what does this say to us? Okay, next week, are we going to have a match between Punk and McIntyre on TV? Don't know. Are we going to have them facing each other during the Royal Rumble? Potentially. It hasn't given us really another layer that we can peel back on the CM Punk onion to look and say, okay, what's the next step here? How are we growing? We had some good back and forth on the mic, so that was satisfactory to me. But it does resemble very much the WWE slow burn. Don't give them too much in one go. And it's like, we've got CM Punk. That should be enough for now. It's the vibe that I got from this segment.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because I kind of felt similar, but in different ways. The points you're raising, I actually felt didn't have the same uh, lapse, shall we say, for me in terms of the feeling, because I think the story has been set. Drew gives his opinion of what he thinks of Punk, and he sort of articulated it by saying that you are a guy that I looked up to, needed guidance because I was a younger talent at the time that you were saying you're a locker room leader. He says that, but you left, so, it was up to us to find our own way, and he had to depend on himself. So again, it's doing this idea of CM Punk is selfish and he's only out for himself. And then he adds the extra layer, the two of them, sorry, add the extra layer now of the actual confrontation they could have in the Rumble, which, if it pays off, is excellent. And I would really like the idea of Punk throwing out Drew McIntyre now, and Drew McIntyre's anger and frustration increasing even further. So I get what you mean when you say there aren't many storyline beats being added in, but I like the idea of mini storylines for the Rumble match itself. And we've got a lot of them going on right now, especially with Punk and Cody Rhodes. I like the idea of throwing a Drew McIntyre into the mix through these guys. I like the idea of Jey Uso, who's coming up and saying that he wants to win singles championship gold this year. Imagine him being in the Rumble and getting into the final four or something. I'm not like these are all possibilities. I grant you, but I like the idea of them trying to set up what everyone's going for now.
You've brought up a very good point about who would be the final four potentially, because historically the final four are considered, I guess, like um, the pillars of a Royal Rumble match, so to speak, right? They're your big talent. And the way that I see it panning out now is Punk definitely has to be there. Cody probably should be there as well. But you've got a lot of other just general candidates. You've got the Drew McIntyres. You've got either Damian Priest or Finn Balor from the Judgment Day. But then you've also got these other talent that are trying to break into the main roster, like someone like an LA Knight, like your Randy Orton and AJ Styles from SmackDown, but then also Sami Zayn and Jey Uso. So I do agree with your point that there's a lot of mini storylines that could be leading into the Rumble, but I would like to see all these, shall we call them main event or at least upper tier caliber talent facing off with each other on the weekly television shows. In
All right, well,
singles matches is what I mean.
yeah, I get you. Let's move on because we've had quite a nice discussion there. I'll quickly run through some of the rest of the show. So Tommaso Ciampa beat Finn Balor in a singles match, and this is also obviously leading into DIY trying to challenge for the WWE Tag Team Championships. Kofi Kingston and Ludwig Kaiser had a match that finished in a double countout, and Kaiser sort of beat up Kofi after the match, and he actually threw a desk chair at him at one point and performed a drop kick on Kofi against the steel steps. And this was meant to be seen as retribution for his attack on Giovanni Vinci that injured him during the match last week. There's the developing storyline between Rhea Ripley and Nia Jax forming, with Jax saying that she's going to win the Rumble, and when she does, she's going to challenge Rhea. We had a rematch for the women's tag team championships between Chelsea Green and Piper Niven and the champions Katana Chance and Kaden Carter, with the champs retaining. The Miz beat JD McDonough, which, just as a side point, JD McDonough is turning into a laughing stock, and it's making the Judgment Day look really weak, especially with the R-Truth stuff going on, and I'm not a big fan of it.
Do you know what this reminds me of? Very much so. First of all, R-Truth is hilarious, right?
Oh yeah,
He's very, very good. But what this reminds me of is it's kind of like the NWO when it just got too big for its britches and you knew who were the main event NWO. And then you had the NWO second string, the bench,
the tertiary
people like,
guys.
yeah, all these kinds of people, right? This is actually what it reminds me of because it's very clear who the main event ones are. It's very clear who the non-main event ones are.
Yeah. Speaking of non-event main guys, afterwards we had Seth Rollins have a promo segment, and he got confronted by Jinder Mahal.
Jesus.
Um, and honestly, I wouldn't have cared about this that much, but uh, they're gonna wrestle next week, and Tony Khan of AEW fame decided to sort of call out the ludicrousness of that with the fact that Jinder hasn't won a match in like a year, which he kind of has a point.
Oh, of course he has a point. Like we were all shit talking Jinder up until the point where, granted, he cut a very good promo, right? He cut a very, very good promo in the lead up to The Rock, but that's basically all he did. So there's no chance in hell he's going to be winning the world title. Let's be real. But yeah,
To be
just
fair, we said that the first time he competed for the WWE Championship as well.
we did. You're right. That was very, very much experimental. But in any case, I just see this as being a bit of a throwaway match in the lead up to the Rumble.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. After that, we had Otis and Ivar have a match, which Ivar won with his moonsault. And then Jey Uso had a backstage segment with, I think Jackie Redmond is her name. And he said that his resolution is to get his first singles title of the year. And the moment he said that, all I could think is, you know what? Him beating Gunter would be perfect. I would really enjoy that. So I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but I really like that idea.
I think that would be nice as well, actually,
Yeah.
because if his goal is just singles titles, I think that would be all right. I don't see it happening before WrestleMania though,
No, no,
because
no.
I do see the him going up with Jimmy at WrestleMania.
My prediction is Jimmy's going to cost Jay at the Rumble, potentially having already
Mm.
been eliminated, or eliminating him himself and building up
Yeah.
to the Mania. And then the show concluded with Cody Rhodes versus Shinsuke Nakamura in a street fight. What and standard to all of WWE's no disqualification matches, there were a series of kendo stick strikes. There was a table. Nakamura used a nunchucks. Cody actually ducked under the mist, and that got blown into the face of the timekeeper, which I thought was different. And I didn't mind it. And Cody sort of wanted to check on him to see if it was all right, and Nakamura seized advantage of Cody's sympathy for the poor guy by hitting him with a steel chair. Cody managed to regain control and actually set up a table in the middle of the ring, but Nakamura managed to overturn the odds, put Cody onto the table, and then he hit him with his knees off the top rope for a two. And just very briefly, the table broke, but it seemed very tame as it broke. It was like a very soft table break spot. And I think Shinsuke noticed this because he decided to bring out another table to set up in the corner and rested against the turnbuckle. At this point, Cody actually hit a pedigree for a two, and then he hit a Cody cutter immediately after for another two. And when Shinsuke went for the Kinshasa, Cody managed to avoid it, sending Nakamura through the table in the corner and then hitting his crossroads for the win. This feels like it may be the end of their mini feud that they've had. Thanasi, what did you think of this as a potential conclusion for this beef?
I thought it was a very good potential conclusion for the mini beef because this is what you like to see, especially at the beginning of the year, but also that between Survivor Series and Royal Rumble period, given that they've removed the December pay-per-view. I thought they did quite well, and I don't really think that they need to see each other again in a singles contest, but they could still have this little storyline continue into the Royal Rumble because Shinsuke is that kind of caliber wrestler. But overall, I think it was quite a satisfying way to end it. And I mean, when the babyface triumphs, it really does have that sense of conclusion and that sense of finality to it. So overall satisfaction genuinely with this one.
Well, that takes us into AEW now, and we're going to start off our discussion with Collision. So, Thanasi, what from Collision really piqued your fancy this week?
Well, on Collision, we opened up the show with Sting and Darby Allin defeating the Workhorsemen in a rare-ish TV appearance by the Stinger, although you're going to allude to another TV appearance, I mean TV in-ring appearance
Yeah.
that happened shortly after this. Then we had Eddie Kingston versus Trent Beretta for the Continental Crown Championship. So he wasn't defending the other two, just the Continental Crown Championship. Similar to the contest at World's End, this was a stiff, hard-hitting contest. And Eddie won, and that was not unexpected. It was his first defense. But my question to Anthony is, are there too many titles in AEW today? And I want to caveat this with, let's remove from consideration the NJPW straps. Let's remove from consideration the Ring of Honor straps. We've got a men's world title, a men's television title, a men's tertiary title in the International Championship, and now we've got this fourth one in the Continental Crown. On the women's side, I think we're good with having one main title and then a television title, even though I think they do need to bulk up their roster more. And then you've got the two iterations of the tag belts. It's a lot of straps, especially in the men's heavyweight category. I would have preferred at least like a cruiserweight title instead of this Continental Crown being, a strap that's going to be defended. What are your thoughts on this?
And actually, this is an issue I've had with AEW for a long time now, and it was the one thing about the Continental Classic tournament that I didn't like. I thought almost everything else about it was good. can definitely be improved upon, and we're actually going to get into that with our own video discussing what we would do with the Continental Classic. But I just don't like the idea of a championship that's actually being defended. Like if it was going to be like an Owen Hart Cup sort of thing, where you hold it and you defend it at the next year's iteration, I can get on board with it. But you're right, there's too many titles, even without considering the ROH stuff and the NJPW stuff, which make regular appearances on AEW programming. That's the other problem.
They do, but the reason I brought this up is more I'm comfortable compartmentalizing that because we say, okay, it's kind of like that's a crossover appearance, right? So I don't have as much of a problem with that. But the
It's
thing is,
for me,
it's gotten a little bit too much already.
for me, it's the presentation of it. And what you raise is the fact that even on their own, this is an excellent point you make, even on their own as a company, they've got way too much going on
Yeah.
with titles. And they need to sort of bring it down because the more titles you have, the harder it is to care sometimes about who's holding what. Like the International Championship, the only reason anybody likes it is because Orange Cassidy went on a tear. The TNT Championship right now has only meant as much as it has because of Christian Cage. And the thing is, with that going on, people started to lose interest with MJF as the world champion.
I
So
I
you got to
definitely
be
get
careful.
that.
Yeah, so they've got to be careful because you risk diluting the market with too much championship gold.
And this would actually mean with the introduction now of this fourth singles title, it means that you can have a singles Grand Slam in AEW because you can have all those belts, and you don't even have to consider the inclusion of either of the tag belts, right? So
Yeah,
we've gotten quite a lot.
yeah,
In any case, let me just continue on a little bit here with this
please.
collision review. So we had the Kingdom taking on Commander and Brian Keith, and it was an easy win for the champs who are now competing maskless since they've been revealed as the henchmen of the devil, Adam Cole.
The hired goons, if you will.
The goons hired goons, indeed. We had also Adam Copeland versus Griff Garrison. Copeland initially was cutting a promo, opening it up for an open challenge, and this was a bit of a showcase rather than a squash, even though Griff Garrison it's not what I would call main event caliber. And my question to you, Dimitri, that I want to first put a view on is this the right role for Copeland to provide an expose supporting young talent, win, lose, whatever, kind of like Chris Jericho, as we saw in his match late last year or early last year against Action Andretti was the one.
Yeah.
Do we like seeing Adam Copeland having these showcases? Because it doesn't really seem to me as if him holding titles is where he is most valued right now. He's had lots of world championship reigns. We know how good he is. We don't need to see that point proven. We just want to see him wrestle and wrestle great matches. What do you think here? Because the alternative is it's pointless work doing an open challenge.
For me, I err on that side of thinking. And the reason I think that is because there's no denying Adam Copeland's in the twilight of his career. And when you're that late into the game, it's hard to care about you giving a guy like Griff Garrison a shot. Nothing against him, but with so few matches and little time left, you want Copeland to go for the big ones, the big guys like the Kenny Omegas, like the MJFs, like John Moxley, like Samoa Joe. Like you want him to sort of go up against these really high caliber stars and not offer his services to showcasing the younger talent that just need that shot. The way I equate it is a guy like The Undertaker. He used to give matches to like guys like Randy Orton and Jeff Hardy when they were on the up, but they were very young. But Undertaker was still himself only in his late 30s.
Mm.
It wasn't like he was completely out of it just yet. And as he got older, you saved those matches he had, even with younger guys but the younger guys were being built up as somewhat interesting or something to build the company off. And I think that's what they should do with Copeland is if they're going to identify younger stars, have it be a guy like Ricky Starks, a guy that you actually see a future with building on top of the company and not just a guy that like Griff Garrison who maybe has a future. You want to
What I'm
just,
hearing is let's actually have a program set up for Adam
yes,
Copeland, right? Like let's
yes,
actually build up towards it can either be like a TV special, like a St. Patrick's Day Smash or something, or
Yep.
whatever. But then also, of course, pay-per-view contests in singles, I think would be great.
Yeah.
Continuing on with the show, just to close it out. So Sky Blue defeated Kira Hogan via submission with the Dragon Sleeper. Claudio Castagnoli squashed Andrew Everett. And then in the main event, it was the House of Black versus FTR. When I saw this match on the card, they've actually been building this subtly, but also consistently on Collision. So my first thought was, how did this feud not get on World's End, but there were still two 8-man tag matches? That didn't pass the pub test for me. And in the finish of this, Harwood got the pin after reversing a Buddy Matthews power attempt with his cover attempt. With a sneaky victory, however, the House of Black managed to knock out their opponents because everyone was still quite energetic, and they closed out the segment standing triumphant. So we might be seeing them go to have a more prominent match in future. But that's really it from the Collision review. So just those two major talking points, and I'll hand over back to you.
All right, well, let's now move on to AEW Dynamite, and this was a special edition Dynamite Homecoming with them back at Daly's place in Florida, Jacksonville. And the show started with a contest between Adam Page and Claudio Castagnoli, which went close to 20 minutes. And Page actually had to bring out two buckshot lariats in a row to keep the Swissman down. And then following that, we had an 8-man tag match. We brought it up about World's End. We had two 8-man or 8-woman matches this week on Dynamite. The first was Orange Cassidy, Preston Vance, Dustin Rhodes, and Adam Copeland versus Brian Cage, The Gates of Agony, and Lance Archer. And Thanasi, to piggyback on your point that you raised with the Collision episode, I truly think Copeland's role in AEW when it was brought in was not to be in filler 8-man tag matches
Oh
in
God,
their
no.
programming. And that's another issue I have is it just feels like a waste of his resource in Adam Copeland, the rated R superstar, a guy that also starred this week in the Percy Jackson latest episode on Disney Plus, if anyone wants to check it out, and it was very good. And
Disney
that's
Plus doesn't pay us, by the way.
no, it doesn't. But you know what? We're big fans, and Disney Plus, if you want to sponsor us, we're more than willing. But yeah, it was just a bit of a. I think it's a bit of a waste of his time, to be honest, which is really harsh, but it's true. But something that was not a waste of time was the Samoa Joe promo. This is the first time that he's walked out in front of people as the world champion, and he very fittingly suited up. So Barney Stinson would be very proud of him. And he sort of said in a very roundabout way that challengers will have to actually earn a shot against him. He's not going to just do this thing where people can come out and say, I want a match. Like, he actually wants them to earn their place against him. Which I found ironic because then Swerve Strickland just comes out and says he's after the title, which was followed by Adam Page coming out also saying he wants the title this year. And then it got followed up with Hook walking out, who had challenged him on social media, squares up with the world champion, and then raises his finger in a very dictator-like fashion and says, "I'm gonna," and the commentators indicated that that's him saying we're gonna go at it for the title in 1 week's time. So I kind of thought it was interesting that Joe is an excellent promo. I think very underrated as well. Like, I think wrestling fans know it, but it's one of those things that sometimes you don't really think about as much as a guy with like MJF or CM Punk. But Joe is up there.
Oh yeah, we don't say it enough.
But I find it weird that he sort of goes on this point about how the challengers need to earn their place. And a guy like Swerve has, a guy like Page arguably hasn't got the enough momentum just yet. And a guy like Cook, yes, he's got a very good winning record, but it's not like he's facing really tough opposition either. So it kind of feels like, okay, maybe this is Joe slowly building up these other challengers to actually have to credit and just sort of shift the focus back into what AEW started with, which was kind of the idea of you win matches, build up your record, and then get your shot. But in any case, I'm excited that they've sort of rebuilt the World Championship image right now, the World Championship scene. Feels like there are options, and that's always a good thing, I think.
Can I just tell you how happy I was when I saw Swerve being the first one to respond? I was just like, it was a bit like Janosch from the Ghostbusters 2 when he's talking, when
Yeah.
he's hearing the second spiel from Vigo, where he's like, yes, command me, Lord. And then by the time Hangman comes up, it's like, okay, I've seen this before, the Scourge, like that's kind of how I was feeling.
I have very high hopes for Swerve, to be honest. I think this is going to be his year where he really, really takes that final
Revolution, let's
step.
make it happen.
Oh, yeah. Well, after that promo segment with the world champion, we had Sammy Guevara beat Ricky Starks in a singles match, and this was followed by the other eight-person tag match. This was with the women: Willow Nightingale, Chris Statlander, Anna Jay, and Thunder Rosa versus Soraya, Ruby Soho, Sky Blue, and Julia Hart. And Anna Jay got the win for her team via submission on Sky Blue. This was then followed by Roderick Strong versus the bounty hunter Brian Keith, with Roddy Strong getting the win. And then Adam Cole, that is, on the mic afterwards, sort of just repeated what he said last week, which is they're going for the titles and they're going to be dominant and, they're going to be around for a long time. And I thought it's a bit of a waste of a minute. He's just sort of like, we talk about not developing the storyline. There wasn't anything he was adding here. He was just reinforcing the thing that we already know. And this was followed up with the main event of the night, which was Konosuke Takeshita and Powerhouse Hobbs versus Sting and Darby Allin in a tornado tag team match. And some notable highlights. Firstly, Ric Flair, as a nearly 80-year-old man, got into the ring, started chopping Will Hobbs, and then pokes him in the eye. Rick, I don't know what you're doing at your age, but just perhaps, let's not attack the young talent now and stay
Yeah, can
alive.
I can I tell you, I think this was the first time ever that I've watched Ric Flair move, and I've been very lenient, right? Because it's taken until this long, where I've just gotten very concerned, very worried, and very upset because I'm seeing this guy, he's literally moving like a papu,
Yeah.
right? And it's been the case for a while now, but it's the first time that my eyes have really opened to it. And it's like, this is scary. Like he had difficulty getting into and out of the ring. Not an insane amount of difficulty, but he's far from mobile. And we don't need this guy in the ring. The fact that he was wrestling last year or the year before, tremendous, tremendous. But let's move away. Let's keep this guy safe. Let's have him outside. Do what you got to do. But it was sad to see where Ric Flair is right now.
Well, the thing that scares me is that he's said before that he'll never retire and he kind of wants to die in the ring. And when he does shit like this, it kind of makes you think he's not
It might
lying.
happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm very scared. But onto a more youthful take now. Darby Allin managed to perform a coffin drop on Takeshita from atop the bleachers near the entranceway, which was, well, to be fair, quite standard for a guy like Darby Allin. He loves this sort of stuff. Another interesting spot was Sting, who hit his Scorpion Death Drop on Hobbs off of the stage and through the tables ringside. And this was enough for him to get the pinfall victory over the two heels. Uh, Sting's another man who has that adrenaline-seeking attitude. But, at least he's calling time on his career very shortly. And on that point, after the match, there was a question raised by Tony Schiavone in the ring, which is, who will your opponent be at Revolution? And this is when the Young Bucks music hits, and they come out wearing really bad mustaches on their face, and the commentators raise the question of if this is the official challenge against the Icon and his protege in Darby Allin. Then I said, we made a specific podcast episode where our title was centered around who will Sting's last match be against. We sort of said at the time Darby Allin felt like the perfect option, but do you find this a happy substitute? Is this something that you would want to see?
Here's my view, right? First of all, I'm going to go in principle, and then I'll tell you, whether or not I want to see it. So I work in policy, and I'm also an economist, so we know how to work against constraints. Ideally, if you have no constraints, you have Sting in a singles contest against Darby Allin, and that would be fantastic. Let's pose the constraint that it needs to be a doubles contest. It needs to be tag team action, right? Let's put that constraint on the table and let's fix that constraint for the time being. In selecting an opponent, either you're going to have someone who is going to look really good in defeat because they want to put Sting over in his last match, in which case you don't want to have someone that's an up-and-comer because you don't want to derail any momentum. In that instance, the Young Bucks are actually a good shout because they're established, they can cop a loss, and they can say this is like AEW, the company, giving him the nod and saying thank you for your whole wrestling career. This is on your way out. With the same constraint, you can flip it and say, Sting's on his way out. He's retiring. What do you do when you retire? You put someone over. You look at the lights. In which case, the Young Bucks are an awful team to have winning this because they don't need the win. They're part of management. They're part of the upper echelons. They're former tag champions. They don't need the boost, right? So in that instance, if it were to be like an up-and-coming tag team, you might want to look at someone like a Ricky Starks and a Big Bill, right? Like maybe have the titles on the line and have them go over, and then Sting can have his swan song, putting one of them, looking at the lights and putting one of them over. So I don't know if that answers the question fully, but I'm trying to give a little bit of an explanation of how we come to these decisions, right? It's not so much about, because Sting, let's be real, he's not going to sell a pay-per-view. He's going to be a selling point. But you want to have the booking decision just make sense. It's not just necessarily, let's see who's going to sell the most money and let's leave it at that. Just put star power for no reason, right? You want to have some kind of logic to it. Do you have any views on this though? Have I structured it sufficiently well expressed for you?
You have. And to sort of get into it, we already know Revolution's selling point is Sting's last match. It doesn't actually matter who it is against because it's being billed as the last time we see him in the ring. So to your point, it'd be nice to have star power, but it doesn't actually need it. But it has the potential to make a star, or in this case, make stars if it's going to be a tag team match. I think there's no denying, as a singles proposition, Darby Allin's the only one that makes sense, and it just feels thematically pleasing, and uh, it just feels like it's the right angle. If it's if it's a tag match, I just think whether the Young Bucks lose or win, it doesn't add anything to their stock. If they beat Darby Allin and Sting, they're already a bona fide tag team, and quite frankly, they're probably the most over and most established tag team in AEW. Like they could go on a 20-match losing streak, ask for a championship match, and still feel like that makes sense. They're one of the only teams that can do that. So I would say, like what you said with Ricky Starks and Big Bill, maybe even throw in a team like the Guns, give them the shot and give them the rub. Because I think Sting, he should, in my opinion, go out with a loss, whatever that case be, purely because he's been on a winning streak the entire time in AEW. It would be a nice way to sort of just give that baton to the next generation. So I kind of like, I think though, the other thing to consider is if anyone's going to give them a great match, especially a guy like Sting at 64, it's probably going to be the Young Bucks. I'm not the biggest fan of their wrestling style, but you can't deny that they're very high action, very interesting, and they can work around a guy like Sting.
But maybe that's the justification then for what they're going to be going with. But if it's going to be the Young Bucks, I would still like to see Sting get the win, or like similar to how Edge got the win in his last match in WWE.
Well, we'll see what happens and we'll see how things progress. So that brings us to the end of this week's episode of the Audible Finish. But next week we'll be reviewing the content as always, and potentially we'll see an explanation given of what that Young Bucks moment means with AEW. we'll hopefully see some further development in Roman Reigns' arc now going towards the Royal Rumble and see how that develops. But there's plenty to look forward to. It's the Rumble season. It's probably the greatest time of year for WWE wrestling fans. And we'll see how things progress. Thanasi, it's great to have your company as always.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was excellent, and hope to be getting into some good Rumble season talking points in the coming weeks.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. And until next time, we hope everything you do is just too sweet.